Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we got 2 hours of Friday Open Forum for you today. So a little bit of bonus. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, we've got 2 hours for you to call, 888-318-7884. To take your calls, Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy. Thanks for being here with us on a Friday.
Hello, Cy Kellett. Happy to be here on a Friday.
Thank you. And so Friday morning is the morning that your podcast drops, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So what dropped this morning?
Giants. There are various giants that have been reported in human history and folklore and in the Bible, such as Goliath, and not just Goliath. There are others in the Bible as well. So today on Mysterious World, we look at the subject of giants. We talk about giants in mythology and folklore. We talk about the giants in the Bible, what may have been responsible for their gigantism, because there's some genetic evidence that's been proposed, or genetic arguments that have been proposed for why they seem to be related to each other. And also we talk about the science of gigantism, what causes it, and how big humans can actually get.
Now I'm like, how big? Like, well, who's the biggest human that's in there? Have you got a record of the largest human? Is it a skeletal record or a record of someone who people?
No, this is a gentleman who lived in historical times. His name was Robert Wadlow, and he was an American. And we know how big he got, but we don't know how big he would have gotten, because he was a young man when he passed on, and he was still growing at the time.
Wow. All right, we'll tune in and find out all about giants. The number here is 888-318-7884, and you can ask anything you want if you've got a question for Jimmy, 888-318-7884. Jimmy also, they have made a podcast out of his book, A Daily Defense, 365 Days Plus One to Becoming a Better Apologist. So the Daily Defense podcast is up now, and you don't have to start it. And it doesn't start on it's not one of those Father Mike Bible in the Year type of things where you got to start on day one and work your way through. Pick it up anytime you want. There's all kinds of fascinating stuff there. Great way to start your day, end your day, perk you up in the middle of the day. A Daily Defense from Jimmy Akin. Once again, the number is 888-318-7884. Already, let's see. Well, there's 3 lines open. So if you're thinking, it's Jimmy Akin, all the lines are going to fill right up. Well, you know what? We kind of surprised you. We sprung Jimmy on you on a Friday. So here is your opportunity. There are 3 lines open right now. However, we do have some calls. So how about we go to the phones, Jimmy?
Okay.
All right. Wendy in Wyoming, watching on YouTube. You are first up today, Wendy. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. Happy day. Praise the Lord. I want to just reach out to you. I had a church member here. I'm a cancer survivor, and I'm, thankful God saved my life, because I should not be alive. But he spared me. I went through a horrific clinical experience getting to that point. They beat me up pretty good with chemo and radiation and that kind of thing, and I have a disability from it. So I'm going to church, thank God. I'm able to get out and do that. And a woman who I commune with in the church, through different organizations in the church, I told her about, how I went through this horrific clinical experience getting to healing and survivorship. She says, well, you have done your purgatory here on earth, which my eyes just widened. I'm like, excuse me? That doesn't sound right to me. So my question to you is there such a thing as purgatory on earth? I thought it was a heavenly thing. Yeah. And then I want to know, if you have a sin and you use the reconciliation, which is a sacrament of the church, does what she's saying make any sense at all? And,
okay, well, let's let Jimmy tackle it, Wendy. All right.
Okay, so the reason for purgatory has been articulated a little bit differently at different phases in church history. You will find a prominent theme in some eras of church history where where the need for purgatory is explained in terms of a kind of penal theory, where God is punishing us. He's already forgiven the eternal consequences of our sins, but there can remain temporal consequences. Temporal just means, in this case, ones that don't last forever. And so the purpose of purgatory in that case is to discharge or deal with those temporal penalties. More recently, there has been a different reason for purgatory articulated. For example, John Paul II did this. This is the view that you'll find in his writings, and if memory serves, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And basically, it holds that the reason for purgatory is to purify us of disordered desires that we have towards, created things and that lead us to sin. So even when our sin has been forgiven on this model, we can still have disordered desires that need to be fixed. And purgatory does that. Whichever theory is correct, it can make sense to talk about purgatory or some aspect of purgatory being fulfilled on earth in this life if the suffering we experience in this life either discharges the temporal consequences of our sins on the older theory, or if it breaks or heals the disordered desires that we have on the newer theory. So what she said does make some sense. What I would be careful of, though, is thinking that it has taken care of everything, because there can be lingering things. I mean, if we still have disordered desires, those are going to need to get fixed. And so even though suffering in this life can have a redemptive effect, it can help us grow spiritually, I wouldn't automatically conclude that it's all done with and there's nothing left to do at the end of this life.
So all that make sense to you, Wendy?
Well, I want to further address what he just said. So if the church offers sacraments of reconciliation, is that what gets rid of your accession to purgatory? Because, you confess, at least I've been told by the priest, that once you confess something that, is a mortal sin, it's that easy. You confessed it. You've been absolved, and you don't continue in that sin.
All right, so what does purgatory have to do with that?
So what confession does, or reconciliation or penance or whatever you want to call it, what the sacrament does is it deals with the eternal consequences of a mortal sin, or there are no eternal consequences of a venial sin, but it deals with that. It doesn't necessarily remove all consequences of sin. And we can see why, because even in ordinary human relationships, if someone has done something wrong and they've repented of it, that doesn't mean they don't need some consequences. If, let's say, you have children and your children do something wrong, let's say they break somebody's window, and they repent, they're very sorry of it. That doesn't mean they don't have to pay for the window. They may need to do some chores to earn some money to pay for that person's window. And it's actually a good thing that they do that, because it helps reinforce the message, don't do this in the future. It helps make restoration for the damage they caused. It helps them grow spiritually. So God, as the book of Hebrews says, disciplines us like his children to help us grow in holiness. And so even though he's forgiven us, like a parent on earth may forgive their child, they may still insist on some consequences to help the child grow spiritually. And in the same way, God may insist on us experiencing some consequences to help us grow spiritually.
Wendy, that brings us to the break. I hope all that was helpful to you. Thank you very much for starting us off. It's open forum on this Friday afternoon, both hours. Jimmy Akin, our guest. The number is 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio with Matthew Bunson. Join us every week as we talk with the Register's expert writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insights on the important stories that impact your life. Register Radio, every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it is open forum. And I do want to emphasize, because I don't think I have yet, that means open to anyone on any topic. I mean, you don't have to be Catholic to call, certainly. The show is called Catholic Answers Live, but maybe you've got a question that comes from your experience as an unbeliever or as a believer in another faith, whatever. We're happy to take your call. 888-318-7884. Going to Hayden, I think it's Idaho. Emma, is it Hayden, Idaho that you are in, Emma?
Hayden.
Oh, hi. You're
you
on
there?
You're on the air, Emma. Yeah, I was just asking you. Is it Idaho that Hayden is in?
Yeah, it's Idaho.
Oh, okay. All right.
Before I start, I'd like for your viewers or your listeners, your audience, they could pray for my husband. He was just diagnosed with throat cancer.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Emma. We will pray
okay.
for him.
It looks like we caught it really early.
Okay.
He never smoked a day in his life. But anyway, when did Jesus know he was Jesus? I mean, I think the first account would be when he was when his parents couldn't find him and he was in the temple. But I mean, did he know when he was a baby?
Do you mean
I know
when
you
he
don't
was?
have a magic hat.
When you say did he know that he was Jesus? Do you mean like that he was the Son of God?
Yes.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
Emma.
Okay, well, Jesus has two intellects, a divine intellect, which is omniscient and infinite and knows everything. So he always knew that he was the Son of God in his divine intellect. The question is then about his human intellect. And his human intellect, because it's human, is finite and does not know everything. It did include all of the knowledge that he would need in order to execute his mission here on Earth. God made sure by what you could think of as a download, a special download, that he had all the knowledge he would need. But that doesn't settle all of the questions in this area. And historically, a lot of theologians have been of the opinion that Jesus' human intellect, although it was still finite, was the next closest thing to omniscient as you can imagine. They would say that it had all knowledge of all created reality. And that's not everything that exists, because there are possible realities that God could have created and didn't choose to. But a common theory in the history of Catholic theology is that Jesus, in his human intellect, had all knowledge of created reality. And since the fact that his human nature was united to the second person of the Trinity, that's part of reality, he would have known that in his human intellect. And this theory doesn't seem to distinguish between different times in Jesus's life. So on this theory, as soon as he was created, even before he had a brain, even before he had his first neuron, but as soon as he was conceived, he had this supernaturally amplified intellect that would have allowed him to know in his human intellect that he was the Son of God. Now, that's been a very common theory historically. More recently, there have the magisterium, the church's teaching authority, has been taking a different view of things and recognizing the more human limitations that Christ worked with. If you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it acknowledges that there were things Jesus didn't immediately know, and that he would therefore have to ask about them and learn about them the way an ordinary human would. So if that theory is correct, then he would have not had human knowledge prior to having a human brain. And presumably his human knowledge would develop along with his neurology, along with his development of neurons and gray matter and so forth. And he would have learned, say Aramaic the way ordinary children did. And at some point in his childhood, he would have developed the neurology to understand the concept of God and the Son of God and recognized that that's what he was. And we have evidence of him having that awareness before the age of 12 years old, because when he's found in the temple and asked about it, he says, well, didn't you know I needed to be in my Father's house? So he is already at 12 years old displaying consciousness of the fact that he's the Son of God in a unique sense. And so on the more historic view of things, he would have had this knowledge ever since conception. And on the more recent view of things that the magisterium has been articulating, he presumably would have acquired this knowledge at some point during his early childhood.
Emma, I'm going to leave it there. I do want to let you know that folks online, many have said that they will pray for you and your husband. So thank you very much for that. And I know there are many people praying for you at this time with that throat cancer for your husband. And we look forward to talking with you again. I'm going to Kentucky now. Bert in Kentucky, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Bert, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
So, my mom has Alzheimer's and dementia and is not Catholic, and she splits time between family members. And on weekends that we go to Mass, she doesn't completely understand the fact that she's not Catholic and she's not supposed to go down for Mass, which leaves us in a position of either we don't go down to take the Eucharist, or she goes down and we don't know if she's going to attempt to take the Eucharist or not.
Okay, Bert, you dropped out on us, but I think we have the question. It seems like you're asking what to do about this situation. Do we have you back, Bert? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so you dropped out for a minute. So we have the description of what's going on with your mom. I'm sorry that she has the Alzheimer's and dementia that she's suffering with, but you want to know exactly what from Jimmy about when she's at Mass. All right, I think we.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm in a very rural area, so my reception's really bad right now.
Well, just say the question real quick, and we'll see if we can get it to Jimmy.
Okay, so my mom has dementia.
No, you told us all that
Catholic.
part. We got all that, Bert. We just need to know what the question is.
So when we go to Mass, and if we can't.
Okay, I tell you what. I'm going to put Bert on hold. And you guys see if you can, because I don't think you have enough. Do you have enough to answer that?
No, I have enough I can answer.
Okay.
So this is a difficult situation, and the good news about difficult situations is God understands them. So he understands that your mother is not trying to do anything irreverent. She's not trying to do anything to profane the Eucharist. And so if she does end up receiving, it's not going to be a sinful thing for her. She's not going to be held accountable for that because God understands that she's not trying to do anything wrong. So so that's one factor to bear in mind. Another factor, and this is something that you didn't mention, but if I can imagine in a situation where someone is dealing with dementia and you're at Mass and they have forgotten the fact that they shouldn't go to communion, it could be difficult to correct them on the spot. I mean, it could cause a scene, even if depending on the individual. But it might be possible to just say, "Hey, Mom, wait here. I'll be right back," or "We'll be right back," and go receive communion yourselves. And if she's okay with staying there in the pew while you go receive communion, and it doesn't cause a problem, well, then that would be an ideal solution. On the other hand, if you guys choose to remain in the pew and not receive communion in order to avoid a difficult situation with her, that's a sacrifice that God would understand, and that would be praiseworthy. We don't have an obligation to receive communion at Mass. We have an obligation to go to Mass. That's our Sunday obligation. But we don't have an obligation to receive communion while we're there. And so it would be possible for you to remain in the pew, and you'd still fulfill your Sunday obligation. On the other hand, if you don't choose to do that, if you choose to go and receive, and you're not able to just say, "Hey, Mom, wait here for us and we'll be right back," or you could have one member of the family stay with her in the pew just to keep her company. That's another option you might consider. But if she does end up going and receiving communion, God is going to understand that she's not thinking she's doing anything wrong, and therefore she's not going to be held accountable for sinning against him, and you wouldn't need to worry about that.
Bert, thank you very much. I'm sorry we had that little disconnect there, Bert, but I hope that all that answer was helpful to you. I'm going to go to Missouri now. Patricia in Missouri. Patricia, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thanks for taking my call.
Happy to, Patricia.
I was wondering, I heard or read someplace that the Pope was going to ban all Latin masses, and those that have been saying Latin Mass must definitely say the Novus Ordo Mass on Holy Thursday. What is the truth about banning Latin Masses?
Well, so the languages and the form of Mass, the languages in which Mass is celebrated and the form of Mass that's celebrated are within the control of the Church, and so if the Pope chose, he could do such a thing. However, I don't have any good evidence that that's the case. You don't want to believe everything you read, especially on the internet, but even in newspapers these days or on TV shows, you don't want to believe everything you hear. You especially don't want to believe everything that is extreme, like the Pope's going to just ban everything. I think that's very unlikely, personally. I can imagine Pope Francis, based on his history on this subject, wanting to tighten things up in various respects, but he knows, you've got the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, you've got the Institute of Christ the King. I doubt very much there's going to be any kind of blanket ban, and I think that rumor mongering to the contrary does a disservice to people by unnecessarily stirring up anxiety on their part.
Does that settle your mind a little bit, Patricia?
No, because I heard this from a newspaper put out by Credo of St. Louis, and they're fairly reputable. So,
okay, so how did they know this? I mean, was it telepathic contact with Pope Francis? Was it they heard a rumor? Well, I would say you've got a choice to make. I mean, I've told you what I thought. I think it's very unlikely that we would have a blanket ban, and I've encountered these rumors too. And all I've seen is, as far as evidence for them goes, is rumor. Where you have people saying this and not even anyone who has claimed to speak to Pope Francis. I've seen people claim, someone who worked at the Vatican said something. Well, you know what? There are hundreds of people that work at the Vatican, and they're not all in the know. So even if the rumor is true that someone at the Vatican said something like this, that doesn't mean it's accurate. And it would cause notable problems and disruptions if Pope Francis did this. So I don't expect it. And now, if you choose to believe rumors, well, that's your choice. And, you need to make your own decisions on those matters. But I don't see the evidence for this. I only see weakly sourced rumor.
Patricia, thank you. We'll leave it there. We're coming up on our first half-hour break here, and I want to let you know before we go to the break that all 53, when you buy the whole set of 53 Catholic Answers 20 Answers books, they are on sale at a savings of 75% right now. So 75% savings when you buy the whole set. The way to get that whole set is to head over to shop.catholic.com. There's no promo code or anything you have to do. You just, when you buy it right now, especially because they usually do this before Lent, maybe it'll be good Lenten reading for you. Maybe it'd be something you'd like to read during the Lenten season and the Easter season. Whatever is the case, you can get all 53 books in the Catholic Answers 20 Answers series at 75% off right now at shop.catholic.com. It's open forum. Wow, lots of lines open. Perfect time to call. 888-318-7884. Catholic Answers Live is 25 years old. That's a quarter century helping people come into deeper communion with the Catholic faith. As we move into our second quarter century, please help us reach thousands more by becoming a Society 315 monthly donor. Right now, when you join Society 315 at a monthly giving level of $25 or more, we've added some extra perks to the other great benefits we already offer members. Go to givecatholic.com and choose the monthly option to start your donation.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with why we're pro-life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Hi, this is Janet Benkovic-Williams. There's nothing like Women of Grace to explain the truth of our faith, Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I do not know a lot about TikTok, but everything I hear about TikTok is it's terrible and horrible, and I hear all these horrible things. So one of the things that I think that we're doing is adding some good, high-quality stuff to TikTok. But as I said, Thomas, these are just rumors. I don't know anything about TikTok. And so we have Thomas the TikTok Engine who comes in from time to time, asks a question of our apologist on the air that was presented on TikTok, and then he takes the answer back and puts it on TikTok. And then do you get a nice response from that? People
depends on the question and the answer.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. Well, Thomas the TikTok Engine, go ahead with your TikTok question for Jimmy Akin.
Thank you very much, Cy. Jimmy, today's question from TikTok, they just want to know, are Adam and Eve symbolic or real people that existed?
In 1950, Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical called Humanae Generis, and it dealt with a number of matters, including the issue of human evolution, and he indicated that Catholics could entertain the possibility of human evolution, but he said, at least at the time, that Catholics did not have the liberty to view Adam and Eve as something other than two literal historical individuals. And the reason he said that, he spelled it out. He said it was because it wasn't obvious how that could be squared with the church's teachings on original sin. So what that had the effect of doing was, after Humanae Generis came out, it focused a lot of theological attention on the question, could you square the idea that there were more than two original human beings with the church's teaching on original sin? And by the 1960s, the Vatican newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, published an article saying, well, here's how you could do it. And subsequently, even though the church has not really at the highest level addressed this, there has been a pattern of the church allowing people to entertain this view that Adam and Eve may not have been two individuals, but maybe, say, a symbol of the early human community. And we see the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith allowing national catechisms that said that to be printed. In 2002, the International Theological Commission, that is run by it's now called the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, but it's run by the same body, and it published a document called Communion and Stewardship that was open to both possibilities, that mankind emerged as individuals or as a population. And just this week, I was looking at Cardinal Gerhard Muller, who was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith recently. In his systematic theology, he says that this issue is not part of the dogma of original sin, and therefore it could be understood more than one way. So at present, the magisterium is allowing this possibility to be explored.
Okay, Thomas.
Great, Jimmy. Thanks a lot. That's a very detailed answer.
Now go back to
No problem.
TikTok and get us some more questions, Thomas.
Will do, Si.
All right, thank you.
Toot toot.
That was your Thomas the Tank Engine imitation?
That was the Thomas the TikTok Engine impersonation. Si, I'm a completely original character.
All right. I apologize for that, Thomas.
Thank you.
Let's go to Wichita, Kansas now. It's open forum. Jimmy Aiken is our guest. Your calls are welcome. 888-318-7884. Greg in Wichita is listening on KKPN. Greg, glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Aiken.
Yeah, when Jesus was in Nazareth and he read the scroll and said it was fulfilled and they wanted to throw him off the cliff, and it said that he couldn't perform any miracles in there, and it didn't say he wouldn't, he said he couldn't. So was that like the human nature not overriding but knocking up against the divine nature, or what caused that where he could not?
Okay, so actually the text says, at least the text I'm thinking of, says that he couldn't perform any major miracles. He could and did, though, lay his hands on some sick people and cure them. And so in terms of how to explain that, it's certainly not Christ's human nature rubbing up against his divine nature and having some kind of conflict there. The presumptive explanation is going to be that he had made a choice, that he would do miracles in response to people's faith. And because the people in his hometown did not have strong faith, he therefore did not perform any strong miracles there. They had a little bit of faith, and he therefore healed some people, but he didn't do any big major miracles like he did in other places because of their lack of faith. And there's then a question of, how does this get expressed? Well, we can express it using language he chose not to, but we also, given that choice of I'm going to do miracles in response to people's faith, we can then use language to say, well, he couldn't, not meaning it was impossible for him to do them, but given the choice he had made, it was impossible to do them in this circumstance because the condition that he had chosen, namely people having faith, was not fulfilled. It's kind of like, I'm a square dance caller, and sometimes I'm asked to perform a particular dance, to call a particular dance known as the Grand Colonel Spin. Well, if I make a choice that I'm only going to call the Grand Colonel Spin when I'm asked to, and I go to a dance and nobody asks me to perform the Grand Colonel Spin, I might later say, yeah, I couldn't do it tonight, meaning because nobody asked me, not that it was impossible for me to do it. Well, in the same way, the evangelists can say Jesus couldn't do any miracles here, meaning because people didn't have the faith that Jesus had determined he would do miracles in response to.
Okay. So maybe it just has to do with the choice or the use of the word couldn't. And okay.
Yeah, if he wanted to, he could have, but we should understand the term couldn't or could not in terms of given the choice he had made to reward people's faith by doing miracles.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Lots of folks on the line, so I'm going to keep moving. I hope that was helpful to you. It sounds like it was. I'm going to go to Rob in New York watching on YouTube next. Rob, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
I want to warn everybody to be careful around side. Just noticed that laptop crack on the monitor, and I only noticed that after the pro-life show, so be careful. Anyway, quick question, if I may. Could somebody please clear up, piggybacking on the lady who had the confession question, what an indulgence is, how do you attain one, and how is it not, I've just heard a lot of people say how it's baloney and not true, and I just wanted a more comprehensive answer from Gandalf the Red and from the Venerable Saint Sai. If I may, thank you in advance. My phone is miserable. I can't hear anything, so
you're going to go listen.
I'm going to go, and I will hope to hear your answer.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, so I guess let's start with a quick definition of what an indulgence is. It is an intervention by the church using the authority of the keys of the kingdom to lessen, either in whole or in part, the temporal consequences that remain for a person to deal with after they've been forgiven of their sins. So we talked about earlier how it can be reasonable even in families for parents to still impose some penalties on kids even when the kid has been repentant and they've been forgiven, because they need to learn their lesson. It's going to help them grow. Well, the same thing is true of us as Christians. And so we may need to experience some consequences in order to help us grow spiritually, in order to help us internalize the lesson. And if we get on board with that, just like if you have, let's say you've grounded your teenager for a week because of what they've done, you've already forgiven them, but you've grounded them so they learn their lesson. Well, let's suppose that the teenager really gets on board with this and they have a change of heart. They're no longer just being an irresponsible, cynical slacker. They start doing their homework, and they start cleaning their room, and they start being nice to their sister. Well, they're making an effort to improve. And it can be reasonable in that situation for a parent to say, okay, guess what? You're not grounded anymore. They can lift the grounding. And in the same way, if we get on board with the program of spiritual improvement and start making efforts to improve, then by the power of the keys, the church has the ability to intervene and lessen the consequences we would otherwise experience. This is something I've written about it's in my book, The Drama of Salvation. I've also written articles about it that you can find online. One of them is called A Primer on Indulgences, or A Primer on Indulgences, depending on how you want to pronounce that word. But I go through the biblical principles that underlie this because, there are biblical principles that are involved, like temporal consequences can remain after a sin is forgiven. That's very clearly the case. We see examples of that in Scripture. Also, getting on board with spiritual improvement, that has consequences. So I go through and similarly, the church has the keys to the kingdom. So there are principles that underlie this practice, and you can read about them or show it to your friends in that article called A Primer on Indulgences. There's also a parallel piece called Myths about indulgences, because there are a lot of ideas out there that are mistaken about what indulgences are and how they've been used in the past. So I'd suggest getting those online or getting a copy of my book, not a daily defense, but The Drama of Salvation, where both of those are also printed.
Rob, thank you very, very much for the call. Hope it was helpful. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin. One line open right now, 888-318-7884.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
Praise your ministry. I went back to the church after 30 years of staying out of the church after finding your radio station and ministry on terrestrial radio. It wasn't even the internet. And I've been back and I've been evangelizing, and using some of your responses to questions.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest for 2 hours of a little bit of bonus Open Forum this week. We don't usually do Open Forum on Fridays, but we're having some fun doing Open Forum. You're welcome to call, because Open Forum means, as we like to say, open to anyone and on any topic. 888-318-7884, whatever you'd like to ask, it's welcome here. 888-318-7884. Going now to Maryland. Josh is in Maryland watching on YouTube. Josh, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Howdy, Jimmy. Howdy, Si.
Hi, Josh.
Thanks for taking my call. So I am a convert to the Catholic faith, and I find myself having to explain the papacy and the magisterium to my Protestant friends and family. I always explain it as a negative charism, where the Pope in particular is prevented by the Holy Spirit from binding the faithful to heresy. Recently, I've heard that there is another understanding where if the Pope tries to bind heresy, he simply just stops being the Pope. So I just want to get your thoughts on that and ask if you could point me to any more resources on learning more about the magisterium.
Okay, so I actually would tweak the initial expression that you had just slightly, because heresy is the denial, or at least the refusal to believe, a dogma. And a dogma is a very particular thing. The way the term has been used since the 18th century is that a dogma is a teaching that the church has infallibly defined to be divinely revealed. And so that additional element of the church has to have infallibly defined it to be divinely revealed is what makes a dogma. And therefore, dogmas are a subset of the broader category of infallible teachings, because the church could define a teaching just infallibly without specifying that it's also divinely revealed. And so the way papal infallibility works, it pertains to all infallible teachings, not just to those that are dogmas, and therefore it's something a little bit broader than not being able to bind us to believe heresy. Strictly speaking, it would be a protection that keeps the Pope from binding us to believe error, whether the error is a heresy or some other type of error, and error concerning faith and morals. Now, the way that the Church's documents articulate the how the magisterium works, there is guidance coming from the Holy Spirit. You could conceive of infallibility in terms of a strictly negative protection, but we do find elements discussing the Holy Spirit guiding the Church, and that means that even though it's the Pope's decision whether or not to issue an infallible teaching or not, that the Holy Spirit may be playing something greater than a purely negative role, because he could fulfill his negative role, just by giving the Pope a heart attack if he's about to say something wrong. And God might do that, but there's also indication that he's doing a bit more than that. In terms of the idea that if a Pope did teach heresy, he would cease to be Pope. This is an idea that is a theological opinion that has been speculated about in the past. Whether or not it's true is something that is open to debate, and Catholic theologians in prior centuries have taken different positions on this question. Others have said, no, the Pope can't teach heresy under any circumstances, that God will stop that from happening. And with various theologians, they've said that's the more probable opinion to their point of view. In terms of how to learn more about the way the magisterium teaches, I would suggest getting a copy of my book, Teaching with Authority, because I wrote a whole book. I've made a close study of this area, and I realized a number of years ago other people had not. And so I wanted to bring, here's how the Church's magisterium works, to a broader selection of people. And so I wrote the book Teaching with Authority, and I would suggest reading that. And Cy, maybe we can make it easy for Josh by sending him a copy.
Josh, can you hang on a minute? We'll get your address and we'll send you a copy of that.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate the call, and I appreciate the question. I'm going to keep moving. Lines are full, and up next, well, let me put him on hold, though, because if I got to make sure he gets his book. Renee in Virginia, watching on YouTube, you are next. Go ahead, Renee, with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, you guys, thank you so much. So I'm going to hold very, very still, but if my self-call drops, I'll listen to the answer off the air. So it's a kind of a big jumble, so I'm going to go really quickly. A lot of my Protestant friends and people that I see in comments on videos say, well, Peter was not in Rome. Peter was not in Rome. Well, I'm thinking along the lines of Dr. Tim Gray's video talk called Religionless Spirituality, and that he said Jesus was not ready to die until he was ready to die. He was going through grain fields, going off-road, evading the authorities. So I'm thinking that's probably the same thing for Peter, going, off-road and evading the authorities so that he wouldn't get arrested. And so we knew that he was visiting Cornelius, and then after that, we don't know where he went. We assume he went to Rome. So how do we know if he was really in Rome? What do the church fathers have to say about that in regards to our tradition of believing that he was in Rome? And when Peter tells Timothy, several here greet you, he doesn't mention Peter. Maybe that's because they don't want Peter to be known of his whereabouts. And could Paul have been talking to Timothy in code?
Okay. Renee, it's a lot so far. Let's let Jimmy do that, and then we'll see where we are.
Okay, so we have an indication in the New Testament itself that Peter was in Rome, because in his letters he says, those who are in Babylon greet you. And so he indicates he's in a place called Babylon. But the actual city of Babylon in modern Iraq was a ruin at this time. And so scholars have said he's not in the literal Babylon. He's using a code word here. And the word Babylon in a lot of early Second Temple Jewish and early Christian literature is a code for Rome. And so even non-Catholic scholars have looked at that and said, yeah, this is evidence right here in the New Testament that Peter went to Rome. We also have evidence outside of the New Testament. There's a book by actually a Protestant evangelical apologist named Sean McDowell called The Fate of the Apostles, where he goes through what information we have from early Christian sources about what happened to different apostles after the close of the New Testament or after their initial ministry in Palestine. And with a lot of them, we don't know a whole bunch. But with Peter, we do. We have really good evidence. We have multiple sources from the early centuries indicating that Peter went to Rome. We have that in 2nd century documents and 3rd century documents and 4th century documents. So we have a lot of evidence that Peter did minister in Rome. In terms of the letters of Paul, where he's writing in the pastoral epistles from Rome, or at least from arrest under a condition of arrest, and the standard view is that arrest was in Rome. Why doesn't he mention Peter? Well, there could be a number of reasons. I don't see particular reason to say he's talking to Timothy in code about this. I could imagine him not wanting to name check Peter, lest it get Peter in more trouble. But it also could be a few other things. It could be Peter was already dead, because there is some evidence in early Christian sources that Peter died about a year before Paul. So Peter could be already dead, and Paul is in 2 Timothy is writing that shortly before his own death. So Peter may have been dead already, or Paul may not have known what was going on with Peter because he was in jail. Or he may not have been able to convey greetings, because even if they're both alive and they're both in jail at this point, that doesn't mean they're in communications with each other. So Peter wouldn't know that he's writing to Timothy, and therefore Peter can't say, oh, say hi to Timothy for me. Or Peter could have been on a trip, because he didn't stay in Rome the entire time. We have evidence from Peter's own letters, 1st and 2nd Peter, that he did make missionary journeys to various parts of Turkey, for example. And so he knew the people, or at least quite a number of the people that he was writing to, and he could have been on one of his missionary trips. So there are a number of possibilities for why Paul may not mention him in the correspondence with Timothy.
All right, Renee, did we get to everything you wanted to get to?
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll go up real quick to Nova Scotia, Canada. Rob's in Nova Scotia. Rob, can you ask your question kind of quickly so we can get an answer before the top of the hour?
Yes, 2 questions related to what can happen after the confessional. As I understand it, an absolving priest can give a positive endorsement of a penitent in language such as, I know of no impediment in their character that would prevent an advancement in a certain situation. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm correct in that understanding, that would appear to set up an apparent lie. On the one hand, the absolving priest actually knows evidence to the contrary, but is asserting that he doesn't. So is that apparent lie, if indeed he can't make such a positive endorsement, is that justified on the grounds of mental reservation, namely that no one outside the confessional has a moral or legal right to that information?
Yes, it is a mental reservation, because he's reserving or withholding something that he does know if he's heard this person's confessions. But it's not a lie, because everybody knows that's what he's doing, that he's not allowed to reveal information he learned in the confessional that could be to the detriment of the person. And so it's understood, if you ask a priest, hey, what can you tell me about this guy? Well, he may be able to tell you a lot, but he can't tell you what he learned in confession. And so consequently, it's understood that when a priest says something like, I know of no impediment, that he's basing that on what he has learned about the person from outside the confessional rather than what he learned from inside it. So there's no lie because there's no intent to deceive. He's accurately describing what he knows given this restriction, and other people know about that restriction, so they know how to understand his answer.
Rob, thank you. I appreciate that. A whole bunch more folks on the line. So if you're on the line, hang on the line because we'll be right back with more Open Forum, and Jimmy Akin will continue with us next hour. If you haven't called yet, 2 lines open, 888-318-7884. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin's here with us for a little Friday bonus of Open Forum. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Jimmy, one of the giants of Catholic apologetics. He's got a giant podcast over at mysterious.fm. What's it about this week? I forgot. What's the topic?
Giants.
Oh, yeah, Giants. That's right. The topic is Giants. Wasn't there a TV show where people went to the land of the Giants? Maybe it was called Land of the Giants.
Land of the Giants. Yes, there was.
Yeah, it was always
in the 60s.
Because they always had like a giant phone that they would run and hide behind the people. They had these big phones or like a big ear of corn or something they'd have to run and hide behind. Any of you?
I've seen bits of Land of the Giants, but I like even better an early. This is back when Doctor Who was in black and white, but there's like a very early episode of Doctor Who where the TARDIS materializes tiny, and they get out of the TARDIS, and they're like an inch or two tall, and having to interact with this big, huge environment, and you don't see the TARDIS do that very much, but
that's cool.
They have episodes where they play with its size like that.
You had to have watched the show Time Tunnel, though. Did you see the show Time Tunnel?
Oh yeah, I was a big fan of Time Tunnel when I could find it.
Yeah, it's hard to find. Yeah.
They were always changing when it was on when I was a kid.
Yeah, there were certain shows where you were so happy when you would just stumble upon them. Time Tunnel was one of them, and then I think it was Voyage Under the Sea or Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I loved it when
to the bottom of the sea. Yeah.
All right, so if people go to mysterious.fm today, there is an episode on Giants.
Yep.
All right.
And it'll be there if they go tomorrow as well. We don't take them down.
Well, all right. I just meant it's there already.
Yeah.
But if you go through the Time Tunnel, it won't be there yesterday because they drop on Fridays. A whole bunch of people on the line. Let's go to Sparks, Nevada to start. Teresa, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio in Sparks, Nevada. We're glad you're here. Thanks for starting us off this hour. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks for taking my call and for helping me celebrate my 57th birthday.
Congratulations. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're a mere child of 57.
But I thought I'm going to make my birthday just a little better and call, and thanks for taking my call. So here's my question. I'm recently, the third week of Easter this year, came back to the Catholic Church, and I have had such solace and completely different experience. I guess technically I'm a cradle Catholic, with reconciliation. And I recently went to Mass and then to reconciliation, and it was not our parish priest that was facilitating. And I'm remembering lots of mistakes, sins, in fragments and parts that I'm finding a lot of solace and getting closer and closer to God, to Jesus, leaning into the Virgin Mary. And when I go to reconciliation, I'm sharing. And this priest, who I didn't know at all, when I started to share a part two, if you will, of a sin that I had committed years ago, was pretty riled up and said, you do not need to say anything else. Your sins, all of your sins have been forgiven from when you went to reconciliation the first time. You do not need to share any additional parts. You are forgiven. My question is, in listening to the show just about every day, and lots of EWTN, is that true? Because the encouragement that I have received in listening to the show and apologists like yourselves is that when you do have a recollection, yes, you're forgiven, and share it in confession again with your parish priest. So that's my question.
Okay, so in order to be forgiven of a sin, we need to be willing to, of a mortal sin, we need to be willing to confess it. And so if you forget a sin in confession, all of your mortal sins will be forgiven. But if you then remember it, you do need to be willing to confess it. So under ordinary circumstances, you should just mention it in your next confession and say, I forgot to mention this last time, but I did this. You don't even have to say, I forgot to mention this. If you have a problematic priest who's giving you trouble for trying to confess these things, just say, I did this, because that's true. You did this, and it hasn't been confessed yet, and so you're confessing it now. The priest doesn't need to know that it was forgotten in your previous confession, so you can just say, I did this, and that'll take care of it. Now, there can be situations where individuals are suffering from a condition known as scrupulosity, and in scrupulosity, it's a normal part of spiritual maturation. Everybody goes through this if they are serious about their faith, because scrupulosity is essentially a misalignment of how much do I need to worry about things versus how little should I worry about them. And sometimes in their spiritual development, people go through a phase, and it's normal for this to happen, where they're worrying excessively about things. And some people experience chronic scrupulosity. They kind of get stuck in that stage, and this is often caused by anxiety disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder. It can very easily lead to scrupulosity in religious people. So in cases where a penitent is suffering from scrupulosity, priests may need to impose rules like, don't keep reconfessing this, because there will be people who are suffering from scrupulosity and think, I don't remember if I confessed this. Maybe I better confess it again, or maybe I shouldn't. And they get torn between these options, and they start self-torturing, which is emotionally, which is what scrupulosity wants you to do and what OCD wants you to do. And so to cut through that self-torture, priests can have a need to tell someone, don't keep reconfessing this. You've already confessed it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to worry about did you do it or not. Assume that you have confessed it unless you are absolutely sure that you haven't. But that's for people who are suffering from scrupulosity. And if you're not one of those people, then and you're not self-torturing about did I confess this or not, then it's perfectly reasonable to say, oh yeah, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to confess this now. And you don't need to tell the priest, or you can, but you don't need to tell the priest that you think you may have forgotten to confess it in the past. Just confess it. It's okay if you confess things more than once, so don't worry about it. As long as it's not causing you a problem, as long as you're not self-torturing about have I confessed it before, then you can just go ahead and reconfess it and leave it at that.
Awesome. All right.
Teresa.
Thanks for making my birthday awesome.
No, we're not done that yet, though. You got to pick your present. Do you want a daily defense or the Bible is a Catholic book?
Bible is a Catholic book.
You got it. Bible is a Catholic book for Teresa. Happy birthday, Teresa. Where are we going now? Next up, Carl in Rapid City, South Dakota, listening on Real Presence Radio. Carl, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Happy to.
I am a convert to the Catholic faith and grew up in a non-religious family, and I actually learned fairly recently that my father is a cradle Catholic who fell away from the faith 30 years ago or so, and hasn't been to church since. He still considers himself a Catholic, and I was wondering if you guys had any advice for how to bring him back into the faith.
Well, I mean, my first inclination is just go to him and say, "Hey, Dad, I've recently begun. I'm Catholic now, and I understand that you were raised Catholic and still consider yourself Catholic. Why don't you come to church with me?" And maybe you can get him interested in going back to church that way by accompanying him. And then you'd be available to answer questions or deal with concerns that he has or things like that. But a personal invitation is a great way to start.
Well, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Good,
also, another possibility, you could get him something a video or a little book like The Words of Eternal Life, and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm Catholic, and I understand that you are too, and I've read this, and I thought it was informative for my faith, and so I thought I'd share it with you too."
As a matter of fact, it would be easy for you to get that book, Carl, because we'll send it to you. If you want to hang on and give us your address, it's The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It, by our guest, Jimmy Akin. I have to go to the break, but if you'll stay on the line, Edgar will get your information and we'll send you The Words of Eternal Life. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Divine Intimacy Radio.
The greatest joy in my life is helping others to come to know Christ more fully. And there's no better light on this path, the path to deep union with God, than the wisdom of the saints. Talking about this daily on EWTN Radio is one of the great joys of my life.
Divine Intimacy Radio, Sunday, 6:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 11 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's here. We're doing open forum, a little bonus open forum for a Friday. If you'd like to get in the line, we could probably get you on before the end of the show. 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Next up, we go to Indiana, where Leanna is listening on, it says Apple Music. I didn't know you could do that, but that's cool. Leanna, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question is, I was in RCIA classes about 15 years ago. I wasn't married to my husband at the time. I was married to him. We didn't get married in a Catholic church. The priest gave us a blessing when I was going through RCIA because I thought it would be important for my husband and I. Since then, we have been divorced. It'll be 13 years now, and I met someone else, and I want to get married. And now I'm wondering, am I allowed to get married in the Catholic Church, or do I have to get annulment? Does that blessing count? Is it in the eyes of God? I just need a little clarification. I got two different answers from two different priests. So one said, did you feel that when, Father gave you the blessing, was God in your marriage? And I'm like, of course.
Yeah, okay, that's irrelevant. Feelings do not answer this question. Okay, so I'll tell you what church law says, but I need to ask a clarifying question. So when you married your first husband, had you been received into the Catholic Church at that point yet or not?
No.
Okay, so as a non-Catholic, you married your first husband in a non-Catholic ceremony. Had your husband ever been baptized or received into the Catholic Church?
Yes.
Before you married him?
Yes, correct.
Did he, before your marriage, did he go to anyone in the church and obtain dispensation to have a non-Catholic wedding ceremony? This is what's known as a dispensation from form. Okay.
No.
So since you're
Catholic, yeah.
Okay. So since your husband was a Catholic, and I assume there were no emergency circumstances like he was about to ship off in wartime or anything like that. Yeah. So okay, so under ordinary circumstances, a person who is a member of the Catholic Church is required, by the way, I guess I should close one other possibility. What year did that marriage happen?
In 95.
95.
We got married by Justice of the Peace in 19. Yep.
Okay, and he
Catholic. Yeah.
Oh, and he had not joined another religion formally. He was just a lapsed Catholic. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So ordinarily, a Catholic who wants to marry a non-Catholic either needs to have a Catholic service or get a dispensation to have a non-Catholic service. In this case, neither one of those two things happened, and therefore the church would regard, under canon law, the church would regard this marriage as not being valid, meaning it did not come into existence. The fact that your priest later gave you a blessing of some kind is irrelevant, as long as it was just a blessing, as you didn't renew vows or things like that. So under those circumstances, you would not be bound to your first spouse, and therefore you would be at liberty to marry someone else. So if you want to get married to someone else, you would be free to do that in the Catholic Church. In fact, now that you're a Catholic, you'd need to do it in the Catholic Church or get a dispensation. And there might be some formalities involved in filling out some paperwork and getting what's known as a documentary form annulment. That might be waived in some cases, but there might be some paperwork formalities. But fundamentally, your original marriage would not have been valid, and therefore you would be at liberty now to marry someone else.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
No problem.
Leanna, thank you very much for the call. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, off to Des Moines, Iowa now, listening on Iowa Catholic Radio. Robert in Des Moines, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, thanks for taking my call, fellas. I started fooling with injecting narcotics, basically liquid morphine, when I was in 11th grade, and did so all through college. And when I moved to Chicago and got a job with advertising, I moved up to heroin.
Okay.
At about 38, I got on a methadone program. Legal, see a doctor, and they're all around the country, different cities in the country. And I have gotten off a couple times. It's horrible to get off of this stuff. It just is such a long-lasting, long life thing.
Okay.
And so I always, as hard as I try, I screw up again, and then disaster results. I wind up, before you know it, I'm losing a nice apartment, a nice girlfriend, and I'm sleeping in my car.
Okay.
So it's ruined my life. Never got married, no kids, live alone in a studio apartment. Now, here, what my problem is this methadone, is legal and so on and so forth, but I just can't get over it. But I hate to go before God. And I'm 57, like the gal earlier, 58 in April. So it's 30, almost 29 years of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, is it sinning, I guess, is what the question I'm asking.
To use the methadone.
To use the methadone, right?
Okay. All right, Robert.
Well, it's not a sin if one needs the methadone. If you need methadone in order to function, it's how you got here to where if you currently need methadone, how you got to that stage may have involved sins, like getting on opioids that then required methadone treatment. Well, getting on the opioids like heroin, well, that could have involved sin. But regardless of how you got into this situation, treating the current condition is not sinful. It's like if someone gets cancer, well, however they got the cancer, if they need treatment for it, it's okay to use the treatment. And so however you got into the situation where you need methadone to function is not relevant. I mean, you want to repent of your past sins and say, God, I'm sorry. I should never have gotten, on heroin. But God understands that where you are right now, you may need methadone treatment. And it sounds like you've tried to get off the treatment, and it has had bad consequences for you. But it's not desirable to need methadone to function, but if that's the case, it's not sinful to take methadone. So I would encourage you to listen to your doctors and, take whatever you need in order to be able to live as normal a life as possible and trust God and his love and not worry about the fact that you need treatment. Lots of people need various things in order to be able to function. Some people need diabetes drugs, some people need cancer drugs, some people need methadone. Regardless of what they need, we are blessed to be living in an age where we have treatment options like these available, and it's not sinful to use them.
See? Well, I greatly appreciate your insights into this, then. And I'm just going to quit worrying about it because it just drives me crazy. And, I was lucky enough to get into a hepatitis C drug trial, and it worked. $32,000 worth of drugs over 8 periods, just for 168 pills.
Well,
it worked. It worked. I'm hepatitis C free, and it no damage to my liver. So it's. I just don't want to ever take a chance of screwing up again. And this methadone works for me. I've never had a dirty UA in 30 years. Coming in with a.
I'm glad you called and asked Jimmy, because it does seem like it eased your mind about it, Robert, and you're always welcome to call back. And we'd love to talk with you again. If you'd like a copy of Jimmy's book, The Words of Eternal Life, I'd love to send it to you. Another 57-year-old reading that book would be good. So just hang on if you'd like the book, and we'll get your address and we'll send it off to you. I got time to do another call before the break, so off I go to Dallas. Maria in Dallas, Texas, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Maria, go ahead with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yes, Jimmy, my question is regarding the Pope. I read somewhere that the Pope made, let's say, a deal, an arrangement, or some sort of agreement with the Chinese Communist Party regarding the Catholic Church in China, into which he apparently gave certain control, let me say that, over our doctrine. Or, for example, like the CCP is going to pretty much decide who will become a priest or a bishop or a cardinal, and not the Pope in the case of a cardinal, and that they were going to make some changes in who we, for example, like, not exactly, but something like that. That instead of as God, we have to, love him over everything, and he's first and foremost for us is to follow Jesus. But in this case, it would be like the CCP instead of Jesus is always first. Then we can do whatever, and as long as
Maria, you'd like Jimmy to.
They will allow religion. Yeah.
You'd like him to explain what's happening in China, or?
Yeah, I would like to know if that is true or not. Is
that true?
Well, it's true that the Vatican has made a deal with the Chinese government, and we don't know the precise details of the agreement because they're confidential. They haven't been published, but we do have a general sense of what it involves, and it doesn't involve all the things you were mentioning. The Chinese government does not have any control of Catholic doctrine. It may insist on various, it may regulate various things, but it doesn't determine doctrine. Neither can it appoint cardinals. That's something that is only done by the Pope. There is apparently a provision that is supposed to involve mutual agreement regarding who is named a bishop. And there has been, it's questionable whether the Chinese government has been abiding by that part of the agreement. In return for these things, they're supposed to allow the church to continue operating and to operate at least as freely as is possible within the Chinese system. And there's certainly reason for concern about this because the Chinese government is not trustworthy. And we have indications that they don't always live by their agreement. And they, frankly, lie a lot. And so there have been individuals like Cardinal Zen, who is Chinese. He's old enough now. He's in his 90s. But he's been very critical of this agreement. So Catholics can have different opinions about it. It's not a matter of doctrine. It's a matter of prudence. The church periodically in history has to negotiate with governments that are sometimes hostile, and it strike the best deal it can. So if there are reasons for concern here, but not as much concern as what it sounded like you were describing.
Thanks, Maria. Got to go to the break. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Catholic Answers Live is 25 years old. That's a quarter century helping people come into deeper communion with the Catholic faith. As we move into our second quarter century, please help us reach thousands more by becoming a Society 315 monthly donor. Right now, when you join Society 315 at a monthly giving level of $25 or more, we've added some extra perks to the other great benefits we already offer members. Go to GiveCatholic.com and choose the monthly option to start your donation.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Benkovic-Williams. There's nothing like Women of Grace to explain the truth of our faith, Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Usually you expect them on Thursday, but we got them on Friday. Jimmy Akin here to take your questions. It's open forum. 888-31-TRUTH is the number. We're going to Indiana now. Elizabeth, listening on Annunciation Radio in Indiana. Welcome, Elizabeth. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. I actually called in last week. I had a question then about I had developed this feeling of compassion for a deceased historical person. And
oh, yes, I remember.
For advice. Yeah. So first, I just really want to thank you. That's mainly what this call is about for me. I listened to that podcast episode that you mentioned about praying back in time, and that was really everything that I needed to hear, and it was so just encouraging and inspiring. So I really want to thank you for those concepts, which I'd honestly kind of thought through some of that theology on my own and kind of guessed that it would be possible to do some of the things you mentioned in that episode. But that was the first time I heard someone else say it and clarify it. So that was really uplifting for me. So thank you for that.
Elizabeth.
And then
that's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad I was able to be of assistance.
Yeah. And so then you also mentioned when I talked to you last time that it would be possible to maybe obtain an indulgence for someone like this. I don't know if you have any tips for like what I could do to do that, or just to clarify how that would work.
So there are two types of indulgences, partial and plenary. A plenary indulgence, in theory, will remove all of the temporal consequences that remain to be dealt with. A partial one will remove part of them in proportion to the devotion that is shown by the person receiving the indulgence. Indulgences can be applied either for oneself or for someone who has passed on. And in the case of someone who has passed on, the church doesn't have the earthly church does not have direct jurisdiction over such individuals, so they're applied by way of prayer. And so we're essentially, you get an indulgence and you, by way of prayer, ask God to apply the benefits of the indulgence to the person who has passed on. There is a book that contains different indulgences. I mean, you can also just look them up online. But the church's official handbook of indulgences is called the Handbook of Indulgences, although sometimes you'll also see it with part of the title in Greek. The Greek word for handbook is enchiridion, and so sometimes you'll see it as the enchiridion of indulgences, but you can also just look up Handbook of Indulgences. And it has both partial and plenary indulgences in it. It has an introduction that explains how to obtain an indulgence, in particular what you need to do if you want to obtain a plenary indulgence. And so I would suggest getting a copy of the Enchiridion or Handbook of Indulgences and looking through it and seeing what looks appealing to you, and maybe pursuing one or more indulgences and applying them for the benefit of the historical figure that you're concerned with.
Elizabeth, again, thank you very much for that very nice call. I have all my lines full, so I'm going to keep moving, but thank you, and I hope that was helpful. Ron's in Parma, Ohio, listening on the Alexa. Ron, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, good evening, Jimmy and Cy.
Howdy.
Good evening, Ron.
Jimmy, yeah, I've got a question for you on a book that you authored and wrote. Mm-hmm. The Bible is a Catholic book. Now, I'm legally blind, and I purchased that book, and I think that's the one that you also read on. The book was read by you, and I enjoyed that very, very much.
Great.
It was very nice to do that. Yes, it was, sir. And I also bought a book from Trent Horn that was Audible also, and that was very good. And then Cy, I got to commend you on your book also, Teacher of Strange Things. It was really a beautiful book.
Well, thank you, Ron. I was just about to cut you off before that, and then I'm so glad I didn't, because that got really good towards the end. I really appreciate that, Ron.
I'm sure it did, yeah. So, I just want to thank you guys. And maybe someone, because I mean, you're all very, very intelligent on this stuff. And it's too bad there's not more stuff out there for, people that have trouble like this with their sight.
Well, Jimmy has kind of a workaround for that, I think. I don't know.
I'm dyslexic, so I don't enjoy reading. I can, but I don't enjoy reading paper books. And so I use audio books every day, literally every day. Some of them are recorded on Audible, which uses human voice actors to read the books. But also any Kindle book, just about, not absolutely everyone, but just about any Kindle book, Kindle will read it to you. And since you're listening on an Alexa, that also will read it to you. So every day, I will have my Alexa device read me various books. I just say the name of the device and then tell it, read and I give it the title of the book. And if it has trouble finding it, I may specify, like, read the Kindle book and then give it the name. Or I'm sometimes it's not quite as good as it could be in finding the book, so I sometimes have to do workarounds. But in principle, you can have it read just about any Kindle book you want. And I know Catholic Answers publishes extensively in Kindle. All of my books are out in Kindle format, and so even if there's not a human voice recording of them, the electronic voices these days are so good that they're almost the same. So I would suggest using that. You can use your Alexa device to do that. And if you just purchase Kindle editions of various books by different authors, even if they're not available on Audible, you can have a wide range of reading experiences just using the Kindle text-to-speech functionality.
Ron, thanks. I appreciate the call.
I have one more question, if you don't mind, for Jimmy.
No, I don't mind at all. Go ahead.
Jimmy. Okay, I had, we're all talking about, for purgatory, when the people, what is taken away from you when you go through, well, they're talking about indulgences and stuff, to take the sin is forgiven, but whatever is left over, how you ever want to say that, I guess after a certain period of time, or even the church can take that away. The question I have is, I had a priest comes over my house about every 2 months, and I say the confession to him. But also, this is the first I've heard of it before. I didn't know exactly what it does, but he gave me an apostolic pardon.
Oh,
and with an apostolic pardon, what I heard, it takes all of that stuff away.
Is that okay, Jimmy? Is that true?
In principle, yes. The apostolic pardon is normally given at when one is receiving the last rites. So I don't know if you were receiving the last rites or not, Ron. But in principle, it would remove all temporal consequences from the sins. Whether it does so in a particular case is really up to God. But it is in principle effectively a plenary indulgence. And if one is sufficiently spiritually open to receiving it, then one would receive it, the full value of it. Otherwise, one would receive partial value.
And Ron, I'm going to leave it there and say thank you for the call, because I realize we're getting near the end and we still have quite a few people on the line. So it was nice talking with you, Ron. Thank you, and thank you for all the kind words. Therese in Oklahoma, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. You are up next. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Cy. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you so much for taking my call. You guys are absolutely the bomb. I love this show. I listen to it all the time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We're the bomb.
You are. You're the bomb. Hey, I have a question that I truly believe only Jimmy can answer.
Oh, I doubt that. There's probably lots of people who could. But go ahead.
No, because I listen to all of the guys on Catholic Answers, but this is a perfect question for you. A few months ago, you took us on a wonderful journey, and Cy even mentioned it, about types of verbiage that's used in the Bible and how names are translated and words and stuff like that are translated. And then I started thinking about this not too long ago when I'm sitting in Mass listening to someone read the readings in the Scripture. And it has to do with punctuation or serious lack thereof in Scripture in all of our readings. It seems to me, I hope this doesn't sound like a silly question, but there's an awful lot of run-on sentences, commas. So what is, I don't even know how to ask the question, but what is it behind that type of writing style? It doesn't seem to follow the form, fit, and function of, and I'm not an English major or anything like that, of writing.
But it just sounds like it's not well written to you. It doesn't sound like it's written properly.
No, and it's like.
All right, I want to get Jimmy to get you the answer because we're coming near the break. So, Jimmy.
So there are two principal things that are involved here. Now, every author has his own style, and some authors have different sentence structures, different sentence lengths. In fact, if you're typing in Microsoft Word, there's a function that'll bring up statistics on the document and tell you your average sentence is so many words long, and that'll be different for other people. So the different biblical authors have different styles of writing, and it's also impacted by who they're using as a scribe, because scribes also made a contribution in varying degrees to the writing process. And so a little bit of the scribe's style may be peeking through as well. But, different authors have strikingly different styles in the original languages. Mark, for example, has this word that he constantly uses in Greek. It's the word euthus, and it means immediately. And he is just constantly using euthus. Euthus, Jesus did this, and euthus, Jesus did that, and euthus, Peter did this. And he is compelling this sort of forward dynamic sense of action by his writing style. But he's using euthus way more than was normal. And so when Matthew and Luke are using a part of Mark, they normally tone down the euthuses, and they don't use it as often. They regularize his Greek style. But they have their own styles as well, and so do broadly speaking, the authors writing in a given language. So one of the contributions to the way that that the New Testament is written and the Old Testament is the individual style of the authors. The other major component, I guess I should say there are three that kind of contribute to this impression, but the second major component is the style that's used broadly by authors in the original languages. There are two types of discourse that we use in English that affect how different clauses relate to each other. They're known as parataxis and hypotaxis. In parataxis, what happens is you string together a bunch of clauses with conjunctions. Like I might say, I went to the store and I bought a sack of flour, and I got in my car, and I drove home, and I was in a wreck, and the sack of flour broke open, and flour was spilled all over the road. Now, that's called parataxis because it keeps all of those clauses on the same level. They're all equal. They're all joined by the word and in that case. But we have another style of relating clauses in English known as hypotaxis. And hypotaxis subordinates one clause to another. So if I can, I'll attempt to do it off the top of my head, but I might say something like, I went to the store, having purchased a bag of flour, I got in my car and began driving home. Having been hit by a bus, the bag of flour broke open and scattered all over the road. Now, you'll notice I did use and a couple of times there. I communicated the same basic information, but I did it much less by just putting the clauses on the same level. I subordinated some to the others. And I said, having purchased a bag of flour. That's a subordinate clause rather than I went to the store and I purchased a bag of flour. That would put them on the same level. So we have these two different styles of relating clauses, and Hebrew heavily favors parataxis. In fact, there is the Hebrew word for and is ve, and it just happens constantly. In the Hebrew Bible, you're reading vet this, vet that, vet the other thing. They're just using vet all the time to join their clauses, and that's part of what generates the run-on sentence thing. But it can also happen with hypotaxis, where you're subordinating clauses, and St. Paul loves hypotaxis. he has these monstrously complex sentences at times in his epistles, where you have just subordinate clause and subordinate clause. And if you diagram them, you just have all kinds of layers in the diagram because of how complex the sentence is. So that then brings us to the third thing that affects this situation, which is English style. Because English style is not the same as Hebrew style or Greek style. And what would sound totally normal in Hebrew or Greek is not going to sound totally normal in English. And so translators in English have to make choices about how they present what's in the original languages. Some translators try to make it sound exactly like normal English today. But in doing that, you run the risk of losing aspects of the translation that you want to keep. And you can even distort the meaning of the translation. So typically what happens is translators try to find a balance. And they want to retain some aspects of the original, but they want to still make it sound like reasonable English, not perfect street level English, or perfect Queen's English or King's English now, but something that's reasonable. But it will, because they're not just slavishly putting it into English style, it will sound a little funny to the English-speaking ear. But they do make efforts to do things like break up the sentences, the clauses. They'll break up the parataxis in Hebrew. So they'll do things like just put a period and omit the next and, so you don't have too many clauses strung together in a row. They'll break up the sentences. They do the same thing with the hypotaxis in the New Testament. Paul will have some monster Godzilla sentence with multiple layers, and they'll break it up into several different sentences so that it reads more like English style. But those are the essential elements. You've got the author's style, you've got the style that's commonly used in the original languages, and then you've got the adaptation to the English style, or partial adaptation.
And that brings us right to the break. We'll take that break, right back with more Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN Radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Wow, time is flying. We're getting near the end. We'll go as quick as we can to try to get as many on as we can with Jimmy Akin during Open Forum. Tom in Tennessee, listening on 99.3 FM. You are next. Go ahead, Tom, with your question for Jimmy.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for taking my call. My question tonight is, in my discipleship endeavors, my endeavoring to bring other people into the church and into disciples of Jesus Christ, I am running into a lot of situations where there seems to be diabolic involvement in the people that are in marriages that were, you got a Catholic married to a non-Catholic, and it was what do you call that? Irregular marriages, as an example, and they're having problems in other areas of life. Just bad luck everywhere. And to me, clearly there's a demonic influence there, and I'm seeing this not in a lot of the folks that I'm friends with. Mm-hmm. We don't have a deliverance ministry in my parish.
Okay.
Well, how do you approach the subject without being either looking crazy or
I've read Father Ritberger's book. I understand about the authority structure and so forth, and I don't want to get myself in trouble, but how do you help these people?
Okay, so the first thing is we want to make sure that we have a good handle on is there something actually demonic happening in a situation before we alarm someone by saying, I think you've got a demon problem. Because demons are scary. They're like bears. But also like bears, they're not hiding under every rock. And a lot of the times they're just out in the woods kind of doing their thing and not intervening in human affairs in a dramatic way. So there are sort of, if you want to think about it this way, there are three types of demonic involvement. The first type 1, is so low level that there is no way to distinguish it from other causes. Classically in Catholic theology, there are three sources of temptation. The world, meaning the example set by others, the flesh, meaning our own disordered desires, and the devil, meaning demons. And normally when people are being tempted or having a problem, you can't tell which of those is the case. It could be a demon is tempting a person. It could be, though, that the temptation is caused by the example that's being set by the world, or it could be that it's the person's own disordered desires, or it could be a combination. There's no real way to untangle those. And the general philosophy that I urge people to have is when you're dealing with this type 1 situation where there are no real ways to distinguish the cause, is don't worry about it. Whether it's the world, the flesh, or the devil that's causing this temptation, you're not gonna be helped by worrying about it. Just deal with it by worrying about what the cause is. Just deal with the temptation. Then there's what you could call type 2 demonic involvement, where the demonic is acting up in such a way that you suspect a demon in particular might be involved, but you're not sure. It's not like we've got someone who's speaking in an alternate voice and displaying preternatural abilities and averse to images of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. And so it's ambiguous. There's some evidence that a demon might be involved in this case, but not enough evidence to make it conclusive. And in these situations, if you have some evidence that a demon might be involved, it can be reasonable to pursue a deliverance ministry. There are various prayers. There's the St. Michael the Archangel prayer from Pope Leo that is very commonly said. I say that one myself sometimes. There are other deliverance prayers. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has a little booklet of deliverance prayers that can be used by the laity. And in approaching someone in this kind of type 2 situation, I would be inclined to say, I noticed you've been having some problems, and it's not possible to know whether a demon might be causing this, but it's possible that one is involved, and we have this deliverance group that you may want to come to. And even if there's not a demon involved, we're still asking for God's blessing and his protection, and that could help you. And also if there might be a demon involved, then we're specifically asking God for deliverance from that. And so that could be a help too. So this might be a helpful way to deal with your situation. Then there's type 3 situations. And type 3 situations are one where you have solid evidence that there is a demon involved. Solid evidence in the case of a possession would be you've got an alternative personality speaking. The individual is showing preternatural abilities, and they're averse to the holy. In that situation, you want to get them an exorcist and let the exorcist deal with it. I also would strongly suggest you listen to episode 188 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World about diagnosing demon situations. It's very easy to misdiagnose. Go to mysterious.fm/188 and listen to the episode. It should help you out.
Tom, thank you very much. I'm sorry to those we didn't get to. A lot of calls today. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. Check him out at mysterious.fm as far as his podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Thank you very much, Jimmy.
My pleasure, Cy.
We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.